Hello and welcome to another special Unsourced Wall presentation. As the release of Spider-Man No Way Home approaches, I thought it'd be cool to go back and revisit the previous two entries in this trilogy, and see what's what. Now before my latest rewatch in preparation for this video, I'd only really seen each of the films one time apiece, basically when they came out. I haven't really been the biggest fan of MCU Spider-Man in general, and even after the rewatch, I do find them weaker than they should be, and my original pre-rewatch opinion was kinda the ordinary one. That Homecoming was the good one, with a better story, better villain, and better storytelling, and Far From Home was the bad one. Nothing but an Iron Man wankfest that was barely even a Spider-Man movie. And after my rewatch, that's completely flipped. Far From Home is by leagues the far superior of the two. Now I'm going to start out by stating why I believe that people feel like Far From Home is the worst one. And it's mainly, well, because Far From Home is a bad sequel. Now how can that be? That I'm saying it's both the better movie and yet a terrible, awful, insane sequel. Well, both can be true. Far From Home basically adds nothing to what Homecoming set up. The Vulture, who was given a lot of character motivation and depth, Liz Allen, Peter's big romantic interest and crush and focus of that film, and Vulture's daughter, Scorpion, who was actually kind of built up as a future antagonist that has actual motivation to get revenge on Spider-Man specifically, and like a little bit more here and there. But none of these things are mentioned or referenced once in Far From Home. They're basically ignored to the point of feeling non-existent. Hell, not only does it ignore Homecoming, it basically redoes or undoes the stuff that it did in itself. Say for instance Flash Thompson, who was remolded from jockey, bully, high school cliche to something that the writers and director thought was more current and fresh. An intellectual bully who wasn't as much jockey and popular as rich and connected. Which I thought could have worked, but Far From Home basically pushes him to the sideline and introduces not Flash Thompson, a jockey, popular, antagonistic, and romantic rival for Peter Parker. I mean, wow. And that's kind of the rub. The way I see it, Homecoming set up a lot of expectations for where the film series could go moving forward, and Far From Home dashing those hopes put a sour taste in everyone's mouth. It was basically a reboot as a second movie. And yet that's kind of what's good about it, because Homecoming is a messy Iron Man wankfest. Now bear with me for a second, but this is maybe the most common criticism of Far From Home, that has a villain connected to Iron Man, and Peter's character arc and development stem from Iron Man and the pondering of his death, etc. And those are completely correct criticisms, but at the very least it's not something like, say, having Iron Man literally appear every couple minutes to stop the movie in its tracks so that it can extol the virtues of Peter's and Tony's dynamic and bond, and literally having Peter's character arc extend directly from Iron Man and his presence in the movie. Homecoming is a movie at war with itself. It's basically two different kinds of movies competing for the same runtime. It's like it wants to be this 80s teen comedy homage, which the trailer makes very clear, but is also leveraging being an extension of the Iron Man trilogy. It's basically an Iron Man trilogy spin-off, and it keeps stopping in its tracks to have these asides that don't add to the individual vision of Homecoming that it has, which makes it feel bloated and limp more often than not. Far From Home has less of that issue. Not to say it doesn't have any of it. I mean, it's still imbued with Iron Man from head to toe, not to mention other extraneous MCU bullshit, but it's less in the foreground than you might expect. Without the direct overriding presence, scene to scene, that the first one relished in, Peter texting Iron Man and happy, or having Robert Downey Jr. directly appear to have a monologue. Peter and his supporting cast actually have a lot more room to breathe this time. Peter himself, while ruminating over Tony's death and the aftermath of that, is at least allowed to do that and contemplate his own life by himself, with some actual introspection. Like he's a self-motivated character that has a through line that we don't have to keep touching base with the face of the MCU to develop. It's a stark and welcome contrast. Like, we actually get more in touch with who Peter is and what being a superhero means to him. And with side characters like Ned and MJ, unsaddled with the cramped conditions of Homecoming, or being a twist character in the case of MJ, are able to have their own shenanigans. MJ in particular goes from almost a cameo role in Homecoming to having an actual, or at least a little bit more personality, and character quirks to help define and round her out. The only odd thing being that in Homecoming, it seems like she and Peter are kind of strangers, but here he's the typical love-starring Peter Parker mooning over Mary Jane. And she is Mary Jane. I mean, Disney is just cowards for not calling her that, but I digress. And it's that kind of thing that makes the movie feel so cut off from Homecoming, but I welcome it because as its own beast, It just seems to understand and balance out the Spider-Man character and plot arc mythos stuff with the MCU synergy nonsense. Up until the third act, the movie moves at a clip, keeping momentum between its teenage hijinks and Spider-Man mystery plot, with the really odd orbital death machine sequence here and there. It's really the third act that this hat trick falls apart, with the odd and overly layered sentimentality and just the most boring boss fight in an MCU movie ever, and that's saying something. Oh yeah, 15 minutes faceless, white floating boxes. That's genius. But other than that, even the denouement of Mysterio is pretty impeccable and speaks more to Peter and the dynamic he and the villain had than another lame Tony Stark scene could have. And yeah, maybe this is a lot of praise in comparison style, but that's worth mentioning and noting because of the disparity a lot of people seem to hold this particular sequel to. Is it a great Spider-Man movie? No, but it's a lot better and a lot more direct than I gave it credit for originally. It's a step toward progress. Will No Way Home continue this trend? I doubt it, but I am willing to be proven wrong. Honestly, I will probably rewatch Far From Home again in the future. It's something that I think I really enjoy this time, and that, you know what, I think is a fun diversion or rainy day movie. Homecoming though, I will never watch again. It was so dull, so boring, and it just dragged. Without the immediate recency of like, ooh, Spider-Man is now in the MCU, it just holds no water. And might be one of the worst Spider-Man movies ever made. But that's another discussion topic for another time. Anyway, what are you thinking about these two movies? Are you excited for No Way Home? Do you think that it will be better or worse than either one of these two? Please leave a comment and like and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts. And I hope you have a great one out there. See you again next time and on the road to No Way Home.